Uh, First of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be called back. I think the whole reason all of us professors would like that somebody remembered something we said, and so I'm genuinely happy that Chief Justice remembered enough to call me back. So I'm happy to do that. I should mention that when I mentioned to my parents in India that I'm going to the Arizona Supreme Court, they were very worried. They said, "What did you do?" I said, "Of all the possible reasons to go to the court, this is the best reason. Talk about something that I like." So so I'm going to talk to you about AI law in the courts. It's a variation on the presentation that Chief Justice and Gary also heard last time. But again, I want to say that it's the last time I gave it, it's about 35, 40 minutes, but I don't have to go through all of it. If there are questions, just stop me. I mean, this is a smaller thing, and just raise your hand, and then I'm happy to take questions, and that's what I do anyway for a living. So I'm very happy to do it here too. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. So anyway, so this you're not obviously. First of all, I'm very happy that the court is doing this. That thinking about what are the best ways to respond to these rapid developments in AI. Obviously, you're not the only one. I mean, this is the National Academies had, I think last year, they have this scientific primer for judges about, how to deal with science issues in courts and so on. And they basically apparently update it every 10 years or something. And so 2011, when they had the last version, there was like barely any mention of AI. And then they were going to do, and that came out in 2014. And so then they were doing it last year, and it was all about, obviously AI has become a much bigger thing. So as all these headlines, there are always new ones. So the worries about scams, worries about, use of AI in cyber crimes, wrongfully accused by AI systems because somebody is using AI systems in deciding essentially. And then, of course, autopilot based accidents and so on. Then, of course, all this machine bias, etc. So, there was this science for judges. I think the report came out. It actually might be of interest to some of the people here. National Academies has a report on this. One chapter is on AI. It's about 89 pages. And then, I was one of the people who spoke there. Somebody asked, remember this slide apparently. So one of the things about AI right now is it's like Mark Twain said about a classic that everybody wishes they have already read it and nobody actually had. AI has sort of reached a classic status now, in the sense everybody wants to be an expert, and apparently the fastest things on earth is one of them is becoming an expert is in AI. My own expertise has basically been.
That's on my end.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay. Is that okay?
Let's see if I can force it.
Okay. Yeah, now it's fine. No, it's not good. Okay, now yeah. So my own expertise actually took a long time for me to get there. So I did started like in speech recognition and so on, and I run an AI group at ASU. We work on a bunch of things. Some are mostly technical stuff related to human AI interaction, as well as everybody does these days, large language models, and for example, whether they have certain types of abilities, such as planning and reasoning abilities. In fact, yesterday there's a paper that in the Annals of New York Academy of Sciences on can large language models reason and plan. Those are kind of some of the things that we do. I also do public outreach about social technical impacts of AI, partly because everybody sort of wants to know, and there's just too many people who don't actually have done any introduction to AI courses. I mean, I basically say that the demand for AI experts with no background in AI has never been greater. So I do this as part of what I do for helping that. And so, I write a bunch of articles, and then if any of you ask me, especially if I can be of use, and I spend time kind of doing that. Okay. So let's get into the thing. So I want to tell you about the things in AI right now, but not a parted history, because you can read parted histories anywhere. Or I want to give you a sense of understanding what changed. And, there are different types of AI, and everybody talks about ChatGPT when they think about AI right now. But that's not the only thing that you in law would have to worry about. I mean, for example, there are many things like when the Broward County judges used, a system to decide whether or not to extend bail to people. That was what I would call a deep and narrow system. It was trained for that specific task as against broad and shallow, like this, these ones that I would be talking about, that things like ChatGPT that you know of. So what changed? I want to kind of walk you through, a high level what changed. I want you to think of the fact that when kids come into this world, they start doing perceptual and manipulation intelligence. They start holding everything, putting it in their mouth, etc., etc. Then what? Okay. And then they learn some emotional stuff. Then they learn how to do social communicative intelligence. And then finally start doing things that we consider reasoning, SATs, etc., etc. The weird thing is AI as a discipline has been around with a name from 1956. In fact, it's one of the few intellectual disciplines that can trace its naming to a very specific conference, the Dartmouth Conference on AI in 1956. A bunch of people got together and said, let's do this. And so from 56 till, in the beginning, the AI systems actually went in the opposite direction. You started being able to do things like cognitive and reasoning intelligence tasks. Then you started doing social communicative, and perceptual intelligence is almost the last thing that happened, because it actually, one of the weird reasons this happens is that there is this connection between one of the ideas that I want you to think of is tacit versus explicit knowledge tasks. So a tacit knowledge task is you do it, but you don't know how you do it. So I have seen Chief Justice in December, I can recognize him now. But if you ask me exactly, tell me how did you recognize him, I don't know how to write that. Okay, I mean, I'll give some random descriptions, but that's not really what I'm getting at. On the other hand, explicit knowledge task, you're playing chess, there are moves, there are actual rules about how to make moves, etc., etc. So these are things, not only do we do it, but we know how we do it. Intelligence as a whole, first of all, we are not the only species with intelligence. Obviously, you know that your dogs and your cats and every animal has to have intelligence to survive in the world. Most of that, and in some sense, our own intelligence is sort of layered on top of it. And most of that we take for granted actually is tacit knowledge. So they do it, but the cat doesn't tell you exactly how it is doing what it is doing. Humans, basically, one of the great things is we actually started adding the explicit knowledge task. And in fact, I would say that this August gathering is like, kind of a pinnacle of civilization, in the sense you don't get to see somebody and say, you look like a criminal, I'll put you behind bars. You have to actually give reason. Even if you thought so, right, when you saw the person, you still have to give an actual explicit reasoning as to why this is the case. That's basically, to me, I think of that as a pinnacle of human civilization, that we don't just go by saying, we feel that's the case. That's what my guts tell me. Okay, but guts are very important. In fact, many things that we do while we are walking, while we are running out of we're getting out of a car that's coming at us, that reflexive reasoning without the ability to explain why you did what you did, the tacit knowledge becomes very important. The reason I bring this all up is perception oftentimes is tacit knowledge task, whereas cognitive reasoning stuff tends to be explicit knowledge tasks. With the explicit knowledge tasks, we knew how we are doing it, so we can tell the computer how to do it, and then sort of manage and then write an algorithm that does chess, for example. So if in 97 already, we lost chess superiority, right? Kasparov basically got defeated. And that was basically an AI system, Deep Blue. And it's a very, very different kind of AI system, than some of the ones that you look at, such as ChatGPTs, because it was actually talking about an explicit knowledge task, first of all, and it's also a deep and narrow system. It does chess very well, but nothing else. Okay. In fact, the joke is it could make the perfect move, but can't recognize a piece. In fact, if those of you might remember the 97 Deep Blue thing, the IBM had employees who would actually type the the actual board position to the machine. So perception couldn't be done, but it could do very deep reasoning once you give it the board position. This was AI too. This is very much relevant. This is the reasoning part. And that stuff we could do. And the perceptual task, the reason it actually took a longer time is we don't know how we do. I don't know how I recognize Chief Justice. I don't know how I recognize any of the people. I don't know how I walk, for example. I have a high-level idea that I need to come here, but the low-level things, I just kind of do it by instinct. For those, we can't write how you do those tasks. You see what I'm saying? So then you have to depend on the system learning from examples, because there is no other way. Saying what you know is a much better shortcut if you happen to know it. If not, then you have to give examples. So most of when you hear AI has become data-based, it's because the only way I can make the system recognize, let's say, Chief Justice McNeil, is to give huge number of pictures of it, and then pictures of him to the system, and then other people's pictures, and then try to train it so that it can differentiate between him versus other people. You see what I'm saying? So that's basically where the data-based AI stuff comes in. So oftentimes, that's where the tacit knowledge stuff comes in. So in the beginning of AI, you would tell what we know and then focus on reasoning. And more later, as I said, from explicit knowledge tasks, the AI shifted to also handling tacit knowledge tasks. And human civilization is both. You need both explicit and tacit knowledge tasks. And so the focus has shifted, as I said, to perception. And one of the weird things about tacit knowledge tasks is that you can actually convert everything into a tacit knowledge task. Even if you know how to do something, you can say, I'll just give examples and you figure out. So somebody comes to the court, or somebody comes, lawyers come to learn law. Instead of teaching them about law, you can just say, here are all the examples, just watch all the court proceedings and try to figure out what is underlying process of law. This can be done, okay? It's a very, very inefficient thing to train yourself as if you are solving a tacit knowledge task when the actual task is explicit. And more importantly, one of the weird things is that if you do that, the system might actually learn things that you didn't intend for it to learn. So in fact, a whole bunch of things like bias, when people say systems are biased, it won't happen in explicit knowledge tasks because people will lose jobs. If you write that, if you see a guy with, following facial, features and skin color, put them in jail. At least I'm so happy to be in at a level of civilization that humanity has that you can't write this, right? And then, whereas if you just saw a huge number of examples, the system might very well focus on features that you didn't intend it to focus on. Do you see what I'm saying? Much of what happens when you say that AI systems are biased is because they're just being trained on data that's just out there. It is not curated. It was just basically, and the stuff that we put on internet is both sublime and ridiculous and racist and odious, right? I mean, you have, the Wikipedia and internet, and you also have 4chan, which I don't know if those of you know, that's like considered like the darkest corner of the web. And all of this data is used to train the systems. And so sometimes it's very hard to control for that. So where you have explicit knowledge, you want to be able to actually use that. And so this business of data versus doctrine tension is something that you want to keep in the back of your mind, because if you just jump into something like ChatGPT or something like a vision system, you're forgetting the fact that, in fact, much of what you guys do is explicit knowledge tasks. You actually have legal doctrine. And instead of just giving the doctrine, you can't just say, why don't you just look at the cases and try to figure out how to decide the next case? And it becomes a much less effective way to train an AI system. That's the thing to keep in mind. So as I said, in fact, one of the things about completely being data-based and letting the system figure out what you're trying to say just by giving it data is that interpretability becomes a big issue. You hear about it in cases too, that the system does something, you have no reason why it did that. Because it learned internal representations that were mostly optimized to focus on optimizing the final decision on the training data. Just to give you an example, for those of you who may not have thought about this, is this old joke that at one point of time, some military contractors were told by, DARPA or people that, it's just this kind of, apocryphal story, but it makes a good point that let's try to look at pictures of, like war grounds and see if there are hidden tanks. It'll be a great thing. Like you take a picture and see if they're hidden tanks. And the point about hidden is they're actually hidden, so you can't see them. So you are supposed to guess whether or not there were hidden tanks. So they trained the system. They basically got a bunch of pictures where they have carefully put tanks behind the trees. And they also got a bunch of pictures where there were no tanks anywhere nearby. And then trained the system to, these are the ones where the tanks are hidden. These are not, these are ones that are not tanks are not hidden. And they trained it and they tested it on the held out data. What held out data is like, some other test data of the same sort of examples. And the system got 100% accuracy. Amazing, right? Pretty amazing. Then somebody thought, what is it actually doing? So it is a neural network system. And so they tried to actually figure out what it is doing. And what it is doing was, it was focusing on the average intensity of the photograph, the light intensity in the photograph. You don't know that light intensity makes, tanks come out of nowhere. What happened is in the training data, they had to actually generate this training data. And the training data in some parts of the ones where they put the tanks behind the trees, that happened to be a cloudy day. The other part of the picture was a sunny day. And so there was a spurious correlation between the light intensity and the label of the data. Do you see what I'm saying? And so it makes the decisions correctly, but for completely wrong reasons. And if you don't know it, in this particular case, they were able to actually show that it was only focusing on this one internal feature. And one of the big worries about these large learned systems is you have no idea what are they really focusing on. And then you will start thinking about, maybe we will ask them to explain. Keep that in the back of your mind. And the problem is you can make up explanations. Humans make up explanations all the time too, right? And these systems are amazingly good at making up explanations. So these are things that you have to keep in mind when you are letting people learn from examples. You don't quite know what are they focusing on necessarily. But you have to do this because for some kinds of tasks, you don't have explicit knowledge. You don't really know how to write, how to make, how to recognize pictures. In fact, believe it or not, until about 2013, there is this whole area called computer vision, which completely depended on us telling systems how to recognize pictures. That's all bogus because we don't know how we recognize faces. And so most of that thing just became historical data. Nobody uses that. And the thing that worked is just let the system learn and then hope for the best. Okay, but then you are hoping for the best. So that's that. One other thing that I want to mention, I'm sort of trying to intersplice the developments and possible connections to a law because I think that will make me more interesting. Obviously, my expertise in law is extremely non-existent, but I do read the papers. So one thing is you would be sometimes asked to decide blame. Somebody's system malfunctioned. Who is going to jail? Who is going to pay? Okay, if it's an algorithm that somebody wrote, it's an explicit knowledge task, then you can actually point out that, look, you wrote this part wrong. You should have known better. So you have to go to jail. If it is a database system, and especially those which are trained on all of the internet data, then it becomes a very difficult question as to which pieces of data together made the system learn this wrong rule, for example. So it becomes extremely hard. Traditional programs are actually, in fact, that's something that you have done, right? And basically traditional programs fail and you do make people pay for it, right? And the same thing for design. I mean, in a Boeing 737, there was a design problem, you make Boeing pay for it. If Boeing says, we just learned this whole thing from data, it becomes more interesting as to how to do it. It's already happening because there is actually, situations where somebody in Canada Air essentially put ChatGPT as a customer agent, and we'll talk about the fact that you have noticed that ChatGPT hallucinates, which actually the word, that way of thinking about it is wrong. In fact, people tend to think that somehow the word hallucination means you mostly think right, but sometimes you think that, your thoughts are not about this world. The better way to think about it is all these ChatGPT style systems are always hallucinating. Sometimes their hallucination aligns with your reality. You see what I'm saying? And when it aligns, you're feeling happy. But in general, but how do you know that it aligns with your reality? You should know the answer to begin with. If you're asking ChatGPT questions for which you don't know the answers, you can't tell whether it is actually telling the right thing or not. So there are two ways in which you happen to know those things. One is, I want to make the essay better. You tend to think that if the ChatGPT writes a better essay, I can tell whether it's syntactically a slightly better essay. The other is, you ask, what is the capital of Belize? And it makes up a name. You have no idea. Because we don't search to check if the search engines know what we know. We search because we don't know the answer. And we don't know the answer, it would actually make up stuff. But so in fact, one of the things we'll see later on is, unless you know the answer, you shouldn't depend on ChatGPT. You should depend on Google, because Google essentially looks at not just the, one of these things from Greeks on, we try to say, separate the message from the messenger. But in the modern world, messenger matters because everybody has a message, and the trustworthiness of the messenger matters. And the way actually Google search engines, for example, work is because they actually tell which is the more trustworthy source, which is not the more trustworthy source, and they put the trustworthy sources higher up in the rankings. And the trustworthiness depends on external factors, not just on what they are saying, but about how many people are pointing to that site, et cetera, et cetera. When ChatGPT, for example, puts out some piece of text, pieces of it are coming from pieces of all over the world, and you have no idea which part is actually coming from 4chan and which part is coming from Supreme Court documents. Okay, so that's the thing. So learned programs, dealing with when things go wrong, dealing with who should pay becomes hard, and you want to keep that in. Okay. The second trend in AI technology that I want you to remember is something I already mentioned a little bit, which is deep and narrow to broad and shallow. Okay, so deep and narrow systems, whether they are explicit knowledge based or trained from data, they do one task and you try to give guarantees about whether they can do that task. So for example, when Deep Blue is actually an explicit knowledge based system which knew how to play chess, and it was basically would make very good moves, and then you can actually tell that it's winning the chess games against the grandmasters and so on. Okay, there are other things, for example, like AlphaFold that some of you may have heard of, which is this protein folding system from DeepMind. It's again it's a example based. That means it's actually a learned system, but it is only for that one particular task, essentially to do protein folding right. So that's a deep and narrow system. And AlphaGo for Go, AlphaFold for protein folding, Deep Blue for chess, diabetic retinopathy systems that you may have heard of. These are actually things that are going to come in front of you. Somebody will say, this system diagnosed me as not having a particular disease, and later on I had the disease, and they should pay, right? In those cases, that's a system that is trained to do well on that task, and there are ways in which you can actually beforehand get estimates of guarantees that such a deep and narrow system can provide based on the samples that the training data it's been trained from. And so those are one type. Okay. The recent trend, however, the stuff that got many of you into this room is broad and shallow systems, which is systems that I like to say, sort of like your doddering old uncle who would hold forth on every possible topic, but with no guarantees of being correct on any of them. That's your ChatGPT. It will hold forth on any possible question you will ask it, no guarantees whatsoever. It's very different from Google because Google tells you, Google doesn't make up information. It tells you what was written in some page and points you to that page. ChatGPT, on the other hand, we'll see in a minute actually how it works, but it essentially sort of, think of it as sort of, I use the toothpaste metaphor, it, squeeze everything of the human knowledge into this tube, and then you give a prompt, it's basically giving out completions of the prompt. And we like it because we civilizationally always confused form with content. I tend to say that pretty much the only people left in the civilization who actually read an entire essay are guys like you, because you guys actually have to read the entire case briefing. Everybody else, I mean, the reason people are worried about ChatGPT kind of making essay writing obsolete, etc., is English teachers were not reading the entire essay most of the time, right? They're looking at it looks in good English, A+. Well, everything will be written in good English. And it's like, most of it may not matter to most of you. I'm from India. English is a crazy language, in case you don't know. And it was very hard to actually make English sound right for me. And so I'm amazed that ChatGPT can never actually make an ungrammatical sentence unless you ask it to speak like an Indian or Chinese or something, then it will do it. Do you understand what I'm saying? You never get wrong grammatical sentence. Grammar is pretty hard in general. If you will know if you know more than one language, which I'm told Americans don't necessarily have. But those of you who know second language know that grammar is very hard. Okay. So in general, we have now gotten into these broad and shallow systems. All the generative AI systems that you keep talking about, ChatGPT, Sora, DALL-E, these are all basically, they're essentially, I mean, especially ChatGPT, it's like across all tasks. It's not meant for any one specific task, but it's not guaranteed to do well on any of these tasks. So it's both its feature and bug. And that becomes very interesting as to how to handle this. As I mentioned briefly earlier, I was trying to mention briefly earlier. So as I said, Air Canada actually had ChatGPT-based customer agent, and somebody essentially prompted it in such a way that it gave them more or less free tickets, like $2 tickets or something for cross-continent travel or something. And then Air Canada said, no, that's just ChatGPT, not us. And Canadian courts wisely said, no, if you put somebody in your organization as your front, then you are responsible for what they say. Right? And so Air Canada suddenly had to pay this $2, basically, honor the $2 fares. That obviously puts a dent in this mad rush to put ChatGPT-based customer agents. And you might see some of these cases coming in front of you because there's still people using it because this talks so nicely. But the form and content are so very different. And we always assumed civilizationally that we somehow thought content is easy, form is hard because it's hard for us to write good English, write sonnets in like iambic pentameter. My way of telling whether I'm talking to a ChatGPT or a human is I'll say, whatever you said, can you please say it in iambic pentameter? If it right away answers, I know I'm talking to ChatGPT. Because no human will be able to convert the form from one to other. You see what I'm saying? It's impossible for us. Okay, keep that in mind. And we always, civilizationally, we always conflated form with content. It was bad idea before too, but it wasn't failing all the time. So we were somehow thinking it's okay. But now with these generative AI systems, everything comes in perfect form. And all of a sudden you have to read, which only you guys do. And so you'll be fine. You'll be doing whatever you're doing before. But the rest of the world is like scared because they were actually just hoping that the beauty of the prose might mean the content is correct. You see what I'm saying? And again, remember that we did this partly because there were spurious correlations. I mean, people who could speak English probably went to good schools or something, and you thought somehow they might know what they're talking about. But all of those correlations are gone now because ChatGPT didn't have to go to any school. It was just trained on whatever every one of us put on the internet. And it's just basically able to generate beautiful English. And so you no longer can take that. Okay, that's about the deep and narrow to broad and shallow. And you have to keep that in mind. As I said, thinking in terms of broad and shallow versus deep or narrow, the implied guarantees are different. And so for courts of law, it's going to be an important thing. And deep and narrow system essentially says, I am a diabetic retinopathy detection system, and here are my guarantees. You estimate the guarantees and you say that, and if you fail, then you can be held responsible. ChatGPT doesn't have any guarantees. It can talk about everything. In fact, one other way of remembering deep and narrow versus broad and shallow is, as they say, a deep or narrow system would be making the perfect next move in chess while the room is on fire. Because it's only good for that one task and it doesn't know how to do any of the other tasks. ChatGPT will actually know. If you ask the same question, it'll say, no, get out of the room first. But it's not guaranteed to be correct in any pieces of the advice. When the advice is right, as you know, then you are happy. If not, you have no way of that. Okay.
Why isn't ChatGPT broad and deep? If it's got all.
If you want to broad and deep, then it's AI is over. And we are not, then I won't have a job. And then it's so it would be great if you have deep and broad systems. That's not possible because of the technology limitations. And in fact, one of the biggest things, I showed you these papers earlier about do ChatGPT kind of systems do reasoning? That's one of the big things. They can't do reasoning. In fact, most of my papers is they can't do reasoning, they can't do planning, they can't do self-verification, they can't do any of these things that people think, not people on the street, people in the research areas themselves were seduced by, my God, this is so general, maybe it can do it. And so one of the meme paper titles is, large language models. So by the way, ChatGPT is a large language model. Large language models are zero-shot XXX. You put whatever you want in the XXX, like zero-shot reasoner, zero-shot verifier, zero-shot law experts, everything. Okay. But most of them are essentially going to, if you ask me, I think they would all fall away, because it's already the tide has turned and people realize there was never any reason to believe that ChatGPT would do that. I'll tell you in a minute why, technically, but that's the thing. So the other thing that, since we are here, I want you to understand this other part, which is a little more technical, that if you are learning anyway from data, you can do two kinds of learning. One is what's called discriminative learning, which is if I give the data, you will give the label. You'll learn how to give the label. So if I show you a mail, you can say, is it a spam mail or a not spam mail? If I show you a picture, you can say, is this Chief Justice or not? You understand what I'm saying? That's discriminative classification. The thing about discriminative classification is you could potentially be able to tell a spam mail from real mail without knowing how to actually make a mail. Do you understand what I'm saying? Right? So you only know how to tell whether this is spam, this is not spam, but can you write a mail? No, I don't know how to write a mail. In fact, rubric-based essay grading is like this. You don't need to know English. You don't need to yourself be an essay writer. You just follow the rules and say this gets 5 points, this gets 10 points, etc. That's discriminative classification. Generative learning, on the other hand, is basically trying to say, instead of just going to check whether it's spam mail or not, I can actually generate mails of different types. I can generate normal mail, I can generate spam mail. And similarly, instead of saying whether he is Chief Justice and whether this is Gary, I can generate people's faces. Okay, there would be Garys of the world, there would be, Brutnells of the world. There would be people who don't exist. And one of the beauties about generative systems is they learn, in essence, the distribution of the objects that they're trying to generate. So you're all examples of how people's faces look, right? But when you have a dream, you sometimes have people who you have seen. There are also other people that are props that are just hanging around, and they also have the same number of eyes and same number of noses, etc. That's because you know how to generate, people's faces. We knew how to do this. In a weird way, what generative systems are able to do now is what we could do in dreams, but we can't, or we can, as if I say something, you can imagine how it might look, but you don't know how to draw. I mean, except those people in the police stations where they can do the sketches. I'll say, yeah, the person who, who mugged me was about this feet, 5 feet tall, and this kind of broad shoulders, and they'll make up some pictures, etc. By the way, that job, unfortunately, is on the way out. Right? Because you can tell this to DALL-E and it will make these pictures. And unfortunately, that's one job that it can do. Okay. So that's the idea of generating the objects instead of just figuring out the labels. You notice that second part is actually bigger problem than the first part. And in fact, it turns out for the longest time in AI, you know that you need a lot more data to actually learn to generate the distribution than to just learn how to figure out whether it's spam mail or not spam mail, which should not be surprising to you, intuitively speaking. Right? And so that's the point about generative AI that you hear about. They're not just labeling, they can actually generate the instances that they're trying to label. And there is an advantage because if you have a choice of having your essay graded by somebody who is grading by rubric versus somebody who actually knows how to write good essays, you probably would go to the second. Right? So that's basically the difference between generative and discriminative AI. And then there is this deep and shallow system, and there is explicit versus tacit knowledge. If you understand these dimensions, you're already way ahead of most of the street talk on the AI expertise. Right? Because it winds up making your life much, much more. You can ask more nuanced questions, and you can also decide who is to be blamed. Most of the time you care about if something goes wrong, we'll go to come to you, and then you'll decide. Okay, so that's the first part. So are there any questions on this? This is like really, I mean, I know that I was sent a mail by Jennifer that you wanted me to go more into kind of understanding the dimensions, so I wanted to spend some time on that. The rest part, second part, is a little bit more about ChatGPT because everybody wants to know about it. I could go there. And the third part goes back to, again, some of the things that I said, which is impacts in terms of, of the different kinds of systems in terms of law. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Well, I agree. I think we're in the place where we all recognize there's value and there's risk, and we don't want to maximize either. We got to balance it. And when you talked about the implicit bias issues, and it seems to me that, and I haven't seen much on this, that AI can help us ferret those out if we got it to look for them, because they're like the broad and shallow issues that we operate off of but don't recognize. So is there a lot of work?
So they can, and I'll say a little about this, but it is a pretty fraught topic. Honestly, the question of AI figuring out. So I've said this in multiple of my talks that one of the beautiful things about generative AI, is Martin Luther King basically said, I'm going to put a mirror to the society. And if the society likes what it saw in the mirror, it will continue to be that society. If not, they will change. Okay. Generative AI puts a mirror to us because this is what we are putting on the internet. And if you think of ChatGPT is humanity's baby, right? Essentially, that you have dark thoughts, you have biased thoughts, etc. So most of the things, when you say, for example, elementary school teacher, it will tend to show mostly women. If you say college engineering professors, it will show balding white men and maybe sometimes balding brown men. Okay. And why? It's because that's how the data is. Now, the question, interesting question, again, jumping ahead, I mean, there are slides for this, is you could try to actually tune the system. I don't know how many of you have heard about Gemini disaster recently. The problem was that's what they tried to do. They tried to social engineer. And my comment on that is if there is any social engineering to be done, I want the society to do it, not a couple of engineers. I think engineers are amazing. I mean, I myself am an engineer, but I don't think I get to decide for the entire society. Okay. And so that's the problem where it's a very fraught thing. If you leave it, they will indeed generate things that are similar to the examples. But if you change it, if you either separately get different kinds of examples to train your system, or you put additional rules after the fact saying, don't do this, don't do that, that could backfire. That was basically what happened when it thought that diversity is important, even when depicting Nazis and the founding fathers of America. it just missed the point that historical truth is historical truth. While you're talking about how would like a imaginary, a future army look like, I want it to be diverse. Okay. How was the 1943 German army looking like? That's a historical truth. And you shouldn't be adding things. And it's a very tricky issue in doing these sorts of things. So anyway, I'm going to quickly go through this, but I'm not. So DALL-E, you guys know, I mean, you can give it prompts and make things. I mean, partly I'm showing this because this is Jamini Rai, and it turns out Jamini Rai is an Bengali painter. Really, this is how his paintings are like. He never painted this. And this was already 2 years back when I asked original DALL-E system to do that. And it's the same prompt asking it to do R.K. Lakshmanan, who is a cartoonist, and it exactly sort of looks like that. Again, you won't know. I know because I know how Jamini Rai looks. I know how R.K. Lakshmanan looks. If you just asked it and if it gave you a picture, you have no idea. Okay. And then, of course, DALL-E does that, sorts of commands, And then, but the point is, if you can imagine, you can deepfake. Okay. We're seeing it all over the place. That's Pope Francis. And on the same day, they also had a deepfake of Donald Trump in chains being dragged away or something. Both the deepfakes came on the same day. Everybody fell for this, not for the other. Not surprising, because you do actually think that if in fact Donald Trump has been arrested, the news will be full of it. Whereas, this guy goes to all sorts of interesting countries and wears exotic dresses. So it looked reasonable. You see what I'm saying? So if you are making deepfakes, make deepfakes that are believable, right? And then that's for the images. The voice calls have become a big issue for Arizona. I mean, Arizona Attorney General, actually, as you would know, has put out a warning saying, don't believe it if your mom calls and says, I desperately need $300. You have to ask, prove yourself to be my mother. The way to ask is like, ask questions that only you and your mother will know the answers to. It's a very sad, unromantic way to deal with our loved ones, but that's where we are right now. Okay, because otherwise you can actually have, people calling, this was the voice cloning stuff where this happened in our valley. This woman's daughter essentially called saying, I've been kidnapped, I need to get money, etc. It turns out the daughter was fine. It's just that the voice was actually the daughter's, and once I make the voice, I can give the text and it'll say it in that perfect voice. And the scary thing is, and so again, the scary thing essentially is that you don't need that much voice sample. As the research is progressing, any of you who have any kind of a public persona, you're sunk already, right? If you talk for more than like an hour, we can easily clone your voice. Actually, the current state of the art is 3 seconds of your voice is enough. This is the world we are in. Okay, and this fact is available. You can go to Google and say voice cloning software and you give it. I mean, it's legal right now. I mean, again, it's like there's nothing wrong with them. There are weird applications that people have come up with originally when this service system was being developed, these kind of things were being done. I think this company was asked, why are you doing it? The best thing they came up with was, well, if a busy mother doesn't have time to read a bedtime story for her child, then AI system in the mother's voice will say the story, right? This is, I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember Cats in the Cradle song. Essentially then the child will grow up and will send a deep fake voice messages to mother too, essentially, because what you get, what you so you read, right? But that's the there are some advantages. In fact, people have used this to animate people who are no longer with us. In fact, I don't know how many of you heard about this. Anthony Bourdain, they made a documentary about him. There are parts where we know historically happened, but nobody was there with a video. So they actually made Anthony Bourdain say it after the fact. And there was all sorts of questions as to is that ethical thing or not. This is the kind of thing we never had to worry about this. And there's ethics and there's also legality of it too. And so there's going to be a very interesting question. And then, of course, it's ultimately entering politics and we are in election season. So you have at least two things. One was in the New Hampshire, people were getting phone calls in Biden's voice. That was not Biden, but just Biden's voice. And this one was the other last week's thing that, there were images being made of Trump with African-American voters who are apparently smiling, and because they apparently probably didn't get as many of those kinds of images in the stock images, and so they had Dali make it. Okay, and so these are kinds of things that are happening. The question is, who's going to check all this? And one of the big issues is, if this presidential election, people will check. If it is a council person election in Tempe, I don't know. You would basically believe whatever shows up on the video that has been sent to you. So we are in a very interesting world right now as far as the deepfakes are concerned. One other thing before I leave and go into LLM's part is, my hopeful thing is, above all, we are adaptable. Human race is very adaptable. We adapt to change in general. Okay, so one of the things that's likely to happen is, some years from now, we no longer trust our ears and eyes. I mean, the show me state is bogus. There's no show me. Okay, right. So show me is not going to be enough. I need actual external proof that what you showed me is real. We used to believe our eyes. We used to believe our ears. That's no longer possible, because I can generate synthetic reality. And so you can't believe your senses, but there are other ways. You can give provenance, you can give cryptographic authentication, etc., etc. They're all much less romantic. That's fine. Remember, in old days, you could leave your money bag, I'm told, in the middle of like Phoenix downtown, and nobody will steal it. And then they will maybe even come and give it to you. These are all the good old days people talk wistfully of. Now you do it, obviously it'll be gone before you even put it down, right? Are we stopping living? No. It's not that important, that it's okay to have that system, but it's also okay to have this system where the many other things are happening, right? So we adapt. And so the way deepfakes will go away is not by technological solutions, which is very hard, because putting watermarks, etc., are not going to work. In fact, the way to think about deepfakes is, don't ask that the deepfakes have a watermark, because bad guys will never put a watermark on them. Opposite, ask the good guys have a watermark. Do you understand what I'm saying? If you have nothing to hide, you should be able to actually provide provenance. If you have something to hide, you say, please, when you being like a terrorist or some bad guy, just put a badge so that will make our life simple. No, it's not going to work. Okay, even if in fact OpenAI agrees with that, and Google agrees with that, one of the other things that you guys have to understand is AI technology is very different from technologies like nuclear technology. There is a clear barrier to entry. Uranium is not easily available. You see what I'm saying? So you embargo uranium, you can stop a country from developing nuclear weapons. There is no such thing for these kinds of systems. In fact, most of these calls, they don't even come from US, these fake calls. They can be, for all you know, they can be in some other country. They can be North Korea, it can be India, it can be China, etc. So, which again, for you, jurisdiction is going to be a huge headache. It's easy if the guy committing crime in, Phoenix is calling from crime, from Phoenix. But most of the time, it's not going to happen. And so it becomes very hard to tell. Even if you make rules, who is going to follow them? That's something that you have to worry about.
So what should a judge or lawyer do now? Someone's trying to introduce a picture or video in court that they suspect might be deepfake. Is there anything they can do?
There are, partly. I'll tell you a little bit, but say right now, as somebody said, I mean, it's an arms race. Right now, there are ways you can tell. One of the things I will show you in a minute is there are certain kinds of imperfections that the generative systems do, right? They have a hard time getting the background consistently. In fact, most of you don't even, when you look at a picture, you don't look at the background. You look at the face. My face looking good, then it's a good picture. Okay, but really behind you are people. If some of those people are in the air, then it's a made-up picture. So in fact, those of you who have seen Sora videos, that were floating about, it looks from outside, it looks like great video. But if you actually focus on, like crowds walking on some street or something, it looks like crowds walking on some street. But if you look very carefully, there will be some people who are levitating. We are not trained normally to look for those. Okay, so right now you can catch that, but then it's a moving target. So in fact, the next generation generative AI systems will be better. So you should assume that currently there may be some things that you can do. One of the other things I'll show in a minute is actually they don't count. Generative systems can't count most of the time. So one thing to do is check the number of fingers and number of toes. I mean, I think I keep making jokes that that's the reason why your mothers and grandmothers said always count the toes of the kid when the kid is born, right? And because, it could be a deep fake kid. So so the point basically is they can't count. And so you could actually, and normally when you show, I mean, how many of you see Simpsons? And it took me a long time before I realized that Simpsons all have only 4 fingers. They look very nice and yellow, but they only have 4 fingers. And I wasn't focusing on that stuff. Now I can't unsee it. Okay. But the point basically is this sort of a thing will give it away. But here is the interesting thing. I said humans are adaptive. Humans are adaptive in both ways. Right now, one of the biggest things that's going to happen is if I catch somebody in the act of crime, they can say, no, we didn't commit it. It was our deepfake. That's going to be a new alibi. That's going to be very, very prominently available for everybody. In fact, I got these mails from, distraught people, for example, saying they have been, they're in some divorce proceedings and one of the parties showed some voice recordings, video recordings, and they don't believe that they are them. Can you at least come to the court and say that such a thing as deepfakes is possible? That's an alibi, essentially. And one of the interesting things, I mean, I have a slide for this, but I won't say it right now, but one of the things is, as I said, as somebody used to say, what all that a 20-foot wall does is to increase the demand for 21-foot ladders. Right? And similarly, all that the fact that they can't count toes correctly is doing is actually there now on internet, on Amazon, you can get a prosthetic extra finger. So when you go to your neighbor's home to steal their packages and their ring camera takes a picture of you, then you can tell the court, look, that's not me because I only have 5 fingers and this picture has 6 fingers and it is generative AI. This is coming to you. This is coming to you. All the bad things, unfortunately, I mean, all the great things that, justice, etc., come from you, but anything bad happens, we'll come and ask you, to deal with it, right? So that's something that you want to do. How much time do you have?
You're doing fine.
Okay, so then I want to do a little bit about LLMs too, which is, again, these are also generative AI systems. They could do generate voice, and generate images, but you can also generate language. But think about it, you talk a lot more about ChatGPT than anything else because we are linguistic animals. We are animals. We do have all the things that animals can do, but we are linguistic animals. That's something that no other animal has. And we are really civilization depended on the fact of language. In fact, most of you are here because you can talk about doctrine. How are you going to talk about it? It's in language. It's explicit knowledge. So one of the things that LLMs do essentially is generate language. And I want to tell you a little about how they do it, and at a very quick level. Basically, think of it. These are ideas called n-gram models. And it's a busy slide. You can't read it right now, but let me explain to you that if I were to give you a sentence and stop, first few words of the sentence and ask you to continue, you will start saying more words. This is like improv, improv where you say, and you were, unhappy in your marriage, and then you start saying some funny things afterwards, right? This is prompt completion. Okay, the interesting thing is ChatGPTs are actually n-gram models, and n-gram models have been studied. So n-gram model says, if I give n-1 previous words, can you predict the nth word? And then having predicted the nth word, now the window shifts. Now I have the new n-1 previous words, predict the next word. What ChatGPT is doing is essentially predicting next word, including the words it predicted, which condition the next word, which is not surprising because if you are doing improv, you start telling a story, then you complete your own story because you can't shift to a different story, right? That's what basically it does. N-gram models have been around for a long time. In fact, Claude Shannon, the father of information theory, was playing around with them. The difference was they were doing n-gram models for n equal to 2 and 3, bigram models, trigram models. What happens is that if you come to ChatGPT, it's essentially a 3,000 word gram model. That means given 3,000 words, can you predict the 3,001th word? On one hand, it's the same idea, but it's on steroids. Okay, it's sort of like, there's this principle of lever, right? Which is basically if I want to lift something, I can put like a lever and then put the one end of the pole underneath it and then pull the pole. That's lever. And then those of you who know Archimedes is said to have said, give me a long enough pole and a fulcrum, I'll lift the universe. That's like, obviously it begs imagination as to where exactly is he going to put a fulcrum that's not in the universe, but it's the same sort of idea. So the question is, it's doing a 3,000 word completion. That's ChatGPT, which is the old one. Right now we have close to 1 million word context window and doing a completion based on. Okay, that's what is happening. And they are trained, and again, this is more of a CS slide, but I want you to understand some of the little parts about how crazy these systems are. They're trained essentially on ginormous amount of data, all the data on the internet. And the way, let me show you this. Actually, let me show you this. So imagine this is an example. So wildcats are but a bunch of wannabe Sunday bills. I hope none of you are from the wrong Arizona school. And so if you have this sentence, this could be one of the sentences on the internet. And what the system is doing during the training phase is it's taking the first word, trying to guess the second word. Taking the first 2 words, trying to get the third word. Taking the first 4 words, trying to get the 5th. And every time it guesses, and then it actually has the data too, so it can compare what it guessed and what that sentence said. The difference is the error, which is then propagated through the network to change the weights slowly. And the metaphor that I would use for changing the weights is if you have seen a synthesizer that disco, in the discos, for example, they use all these small knobs. So you're changing the knob such that you'll get the right kind of a voice. Here you're changing the network weights so that on this example, the error is reduced less. And there's a huge number of these examples. And if you keep doing this, essentially over a period of time, you will learn to predict things that are in the same distribution as the text that you have been trained. So it's plausible English. Again, I said, it's about a plausible world, not your world. Movies are plausible worlds. That's why I say, if you want to write a legal thriller, ChatGPT can be used. If you want to write a case briefing to Chief Justice, ChatGPT is not your thing. That's where all the lawyers got into trouble. Because it made a plausible reality. That's, you guys have all this crazy, Brown versus Board of Education, etc. So why can't I make Rao versus Board of Water Supply? That looks like a case name. Right? And for anybody else who's not in law, it looks like a case name. It's good form. But then I think he's going to say, oh, that actual case I never saw it. Let me look in the list of cases. It's not there. You made it up. You're disbarred. That's the problem. So if you're thinking of the plausibility, ChatGPT is great. For truth, it's not. Yes, sir.
Well, when I'm asked to do things, I don't give it the first word.
Mm-hmm.
So, and how does it know, like, let's say, write a toast for my son's 40th birthday. So I don't give it a word. And how does it know, start generating words on this?
That's one point is you gave a word. You said, write a poem for my son's birthday. And that is enough in a 3,000 word, in a system trained on large context. It has seen enough examples without your knowledge for those questions. What are the kinds of completions that make sense? So you are impressed. I'm impressed too. And you are not saying the first word is this. It's just that if you say this question, the normal continuation is essentially in these big conditional probability tables that it learns. And to give you an idea, to reduce, again, the biggest worry with ChatGPT, in general, all AI systems is anthropomorphization. We think they're like us. We think everything is like us, first of all. Right? We think dogs are like us, we think cats are like us, we think some trees under right conditions are like us. And so we certainly think all AI systems are like us. And certainly they're trying to get intelligence connected, right? So, but there are many differences. Anthropomorphization is a big sin in AI, trying to understand what the system is doing. To give you an idea, most people think when they hear about a like ChatGPT style system, those who are not, even people who are like only kind of started getting into computer science tend to think this. Oh, it's some kind of a network, which has some number of weights, and the weights are being, I gave you my disco, the voice synthesizer thing, you're just changing the knobs, and the knobs are basically the weights of this. Yeah, but the scale is way off. The scale is more like this. Okay, so you think that, this network like this, and maybe it's been given like 8 or 9, or like 100 essays or 10,000 sentences or something. Okay, the scale of these systems is, if you take GPT-4, if you consider the text it's been trained on, and think of it as books, and you basically put them in bookshelves, the bookshelves will stretch for 650 kilometers. Let that sink in. 650 kilometers. Okay, none of us really know what's on the internet. We think we do. Okay, part of our surprise is that, wow, it's able to complete this stuff. How did it know? It explains jokes. Well, it's because, I don't know if you know it, but if you're humor challenged, there are sites on the internet which explain jokes. So then you don't know how to laugh, but then you go there and, oh, and this is where I'm supposed to laugh, you laugh. Okay, and that system actually has access to that too. And this is 650 kilometers worth of books that's being trained on, just let that sink in. If you are training, one of the things is you see the error and then you propagate the error to change the little weights, right? The question is, if you're doing this, each of them takes a little bit of time, right? And in fact, it turns out those are very simplistic operations. And NVIDIA, the company, which I hope all of you own stock of because you are the ones who are happy in this room, basically used to do these things called GPUs, which are dumbed down CPUs, which only basically control individual pixels of basically a display. And gamers used to use that. And then suddenly, when this kind of AI, neural network training has become the popular approach, they said we are an AI company, and they started making much bigger of these GPU systems. And so, in fact, if you were to train GPT-4 on your high-quality laptop, not the government issued, the one that you bought with your own big bucks, right? It will take 7 million years. 7 million years on your laptops. And if you change it to the next Mac model, it's still 7 million years. Let that sink in. Okay. And then finally, the model size, the number of these weights, the number, it's a synthesizer, the number of these weights. How many are there? I mean, you think of a synthesizer, you think of a huge number of, like 100 knobs or something, maybe 50 knobs. It's really, if you put it on an Excel sheet for GPT-4, there are 1.8 trillion knobs. 1.8 trillion knobs. Okay, and so if you write it in like the Excel sheet, it takes 30,000 football fields. That Excel sheet will take that. Let that sink in before you think that you know what ChatGPT would do, because the data it's being trained on is huge. The compute is huge, which is why none of us in the universities can train these right now, because they're extremely costly. Like basically GPT-4 happened because Microsoft put $10 billion of investment into OpenAI. 10 billion. And Sam Altman is going around and saying that I want to do GPT-7. By GPT-7, I need just $7 trillion. Very cheap, $7 trillion. Okay. And in fact, there's a picture, I don't know if it will come here or not, but the way it is going, by about 2026, the training of the AI system, the cost would be higher than the GDP of US. Okay, that's where it's going right now. Okay, so it's kind of one of these things where you wouldn't consider doing this, but now that it's done, somebody did it, you can use it by API access, and and it's very interesting that it happened in our lifetimes, because it's like a crazy idea to spend this amount of compute. Okay, to put this in perspective, the amount of power that's consumed by these kinds of systems, even during inference, forget about training, is sort of in the order of the amount of power needed to keep New York operating. Your brain, less than 40 watts bulb. That sort of tells you where AI is. It's a alien intelligence. It's not intelligence that you and I have. you're coming from a very different angle, but you're doing some of the same tasks. And that's a very interesting way of looking at this. So they look at all of these as, prompts Mr. Bias was saying, you basically give a prompt and it basically writes the completions. It's because it's been trained on this internet scale data, and you really don't have any idea what's all on the internet. But how can these prompt completion engines do so well? So it's magic. I don't have an answer yet. Okay, our area doesn't have an answer. This is how do bridges hold? Romans built bridges. How do bridges hold? I don't know. You'll see, you get your chariot going. If it falls, I'll say sorry. But now you no longer do that. Bridges were built way before strength of materials got understood. At the time of Romans, you are happy that there's a bridge. So if once in a while you fall off the bridge, you shouldn't complain. Now, if you are nicely in the exit row and the window flies off, then you're going to sue everybody. Right? Because those days are over, because you're supposed to know how to design these things and you provide guarantees. So currently we are at the magic stage. In a weird way, in my lifetime, in my time in AI has become from an engineering discipline to an ersatz natural science. It's sort of like ChatGPT or these kinds of systems are like animals that we found in the wild. We don't know what to do, what they do. So you poke them to see what they do and write papers about behavior. The interesting thing is computer scientists are not trained to be good empirical observational science. And so they make stuff up sometimes, saying it seems to have, my dog seems to understand language, or my cat seems to once in a while fly, etc., etc. That's sort of a, hallucinations on our part. But if you want to get some ideas, almost everything we know is also already on the web. Surprisingly. Think about it this way. Remember I showed you that picture where there was the data, there was a compute, and there was a number of parameters. Imagine Sam Altman raised $10 billion, is ready to train GPT-4. He just needed the data. So he comes, he basically gets onto the primetime TV and say, guys, all of you just put everything you want to talk about on the internet. It wouldn't have happened because you'll say, pay us. You understand what I'm saying? In fact, most of the, so the internet happened first because we made internet and the web because we wanted to communicate with each other. We gave away the family jewels. We gave away everything about how anything works, right? And then basically these systems are trained on that. When there is certain data missing, OpenAI has to pay to create that data. Nigeria's GDP has increased, thankfully, because of OpenAI. Because, for example, when they want RLHF or when they want give like the synthetic data, they pay people, poorly paid people, because people here, Phoenix people are apparently getting even better salaries. So people in Nigeria wind up basically being used to produce this synthetic data, which they then, so remember there was 850 kilometers worth of books. You want to add another 1,500 kilometers worth of books to it to increase the data. That's going to be. And so, in fact, that's like a huge bottleneck right now in terms of we have already put what we have put for ourselves, and then that is being used. Okay. The second thing is people think that they have an idea about how N-gram models work, completions work, but you don't have intuitions. You don't have intuitions about 3,000 word gram models. You don't have intuition. Like if I say, I put my left foot and, then you know how to complete it, right foot. Because that's like a 4-gram model. But if we give you like a 3,000 words, what is the next right word? You don't actually have intuitions as to how that kind of completions will work. And so exactly like Mr. Bias, I too am every day very impressed that these things can do these things. Very plausible sounding completion. So that's where we are. So the problem, as I said, is when they're completing, they're not indexing and retrieving data. They're actually completing data that looks like data they have seen. It's like you don't do improv and slap the person because they made up a story. That's like missing the whole point of improv. All stories and improv are made up to make you laugh. Right? They look reasonable. Similarly, movies. You don't yell at people because the movies are not real. Okay. Sometimes they say true-ish, but mostly they're made up. But You like the movies because they seem not too far from the kind of reality you know. That they're not too far from the reality doesn't mean that they are real. Many people will look at movies on some true events and believe everything in that movie. And then you have to go to Wikipedia to see how the movie actually differs from historical truth. This is your life right now, because that's what ChatGPT is going to do. So ChatGPT invented sexual harassment scandal and named a real law professor as the accused. ChatGPT falsely told voters their mayor was jailed for bribery, he might sue. Canadian lawyer under fire for submitting fake cases created by AI chatbot. Chief Justice talked about a whole bunch of things. Everybody is doing it. And I feel sorry for these lawyers because I'm not from your area, but I'm told that Westlaw and LexisNexis are extremely costly to access. And so young lawyers may not have that much money. And so they can actually get $20 access to ChatGPT. It looks pretty good. And, basically on close reading, you'll find all these problems. Okay. Latest ChatGPT lawsuits highlight backup legal theory against AI platforms. So there's this whole entire issue of how to actually decide these generative AI cases. New York Times is suing OpenAI because OpenAI basically gives answers that look very similar to New York Times stories. One of the weird things that I want you to understand, this is actually a technical point, which is relevant, is on one hand, ChatGPT never exactly reproduces anything that's been written. The probability of that happening is always less than 1.0. If you want to exactly reproduce what has been done, go to LexisNexis, go to any database, because databases don't change the data you put in. But we consider them boring because they're not making up. Right? About the only place where creativity is given the sort of, you basically look down on it, is in courts, because you don't want creative witnesses. That's the last thing you want. You don't want creative cases. You may want a creative direction of the argument that you still get to check, but creativity is not a good thing if you actually want accuracy. So what OpenAI is going to do is they're going to normally argue both ways. On one hand, when they say ChatGPT can do search, they're saying it can correctly retrieve the information that is on the internet. But when New York Times says you retrieved our article, they say, no, we are not able to retrieve anything. We only kind of can basically sample from the same distribution. So we couldn't have potentially copied. So copyright law is in big trouble because what exactly does it mean to copy? In a weird way, I have heard lots and lots of people talking, and I'm sure my way of talking has been influenced by them. Singers themselves are influenced, but we do kind of realize, that basically style copying is copying too. And currently style copying is rampant. Okay, that's the thing to remember. Okay, Air Canada, that honoring thing, as I told you, LLMs to do search, please don't wait. If one thing you remember from this, it's like, how hard is it to ask Google for the answers? What LLM is going to do is just make up an answer. One idea that some of you technically inclined might have heard of is this thing called retrieval augmented generation, which is supposed to quote unquote reduce hallucination. All that basically is the best way of understanding it is first send the prompt to Google, take the top result, take the text in that result, put it in the prompt window and ask ChatGPT to summarize. And the hope is while doing summarization, you won't be too creative. Because creativity is the last thing you want when accuracy is important. These are two very different things. You don't get to yell at somebody for both sticking to the script and not being creative enough. Decide which one you want to yell at. And similarly, you can't give them credit for both, okay? So LLMs should not really be used for search. So as I said, LexisNexis is not going to be dethroned by ChatGPT because of all the examples that you're given, because they will make up a case like Rao versus Board of Water. That's not existing. And they look reasonable. And there are ways to try and reduce the hallucination, but none of them will ultimately work. And so, as I said, LLMs are always hallucinating. Sometimes their hallucination aligns with your reality. And more tricky part is whether or not your prompt makes them hallucinate in a way that the reality that the thing that it comes up with aligns with your reality depends on you knowing what your reality is. So if you know what is a good essay and you just don't know, you don't feel like writing one, you can ask it to make an essay slightly better or something and then read it and say it looks good. If you don't know what is the capital of Belize, how much of prompting you do is not going to make any guarantees that the answer it came up with is actually right. You see what I'm saying? So that comes to one of my major claims to fame. In fact, I'm wearing this t-shirt if I can strip in front of you, but is this picture, okay? Which is basically all the impressive claims about accuracy and reasoning and planning abilities of LLMs are all dependent on the prompter knowing the answer, or at least knowing how to verify the answer. Think something like essays are better. You know how to read an essay and see it's better. Versus think knowing the answer for a quantum mechanics question. You don't know the answer. That's why you're asking the search engine. How are you going to check? You're going to look to see whether it is in good form. And welcome to the party. Everything is in good form. So if you don't know the answer, you should never ask. So in fact, so when New York Times asked me sometime back, basically I said, yeah, if I don't know the answer to that question already, I would not give the question to one of these systems. And that became the quote of the day. So I have reached my bucket list. Okay. Like I said, I'm wearing that t-shirt. So after this, if you want to buy some t-shirts, if you're well paid. Now, what are they good for? Okay. Please stop me whenever, give me a 5-minute warning and I'll just stop at that time. Okay. What are they good for? They're good for idea generation.
I'm enjoying this, so I hate to cut you off,
Okay.
but you're doing great, but probably.
Okay, that's fine. That's reasonable. So LLMs are basically, you should see them as idea generators. Ideas are important. Ideas are not right. Ideas are important. So here's a joke. If you want to know how Einstein came up with E equal to MC square, he was trying various other ideas, MC power 7, MC cube, etc. And this janitorial lady came, cleaned up the table and said, now it's all squared away. And that's how he figured out MC square. Yes.
Professor, so I was trying to find like, what's after AI? What do you foresee?
There's nothing after AI. It's just AI. It's just AI all the way up, or down, whatever. I mean, honestly, really, what do you think is our biggest claim to fame in the evolution? And so if we get that, the machines to do that, then essentially that's an interesting thing. So I mean, again, I'm being slightly facetious, but you can say what is after this current technology, and that's relevant to why not broad and deep systems? Why deep and narrow and broad and shallow? Why not broad and deep systems? That's a good kind of AI systems to do. And also many of the other things such as you want essentially systems to be trainable with much less resources than what we are spending right now. And it is actually changing already. Yes.
Wait, Dr. Rao, what about causal AI, where you actually strip the black box off? Wouldn't that be the next thing to say, how did it?
Yeah, the problem, the two issues with it. One is stripping the black box is very hard. Okay, because as I told you, the number of weights are essentially 1.3 trillion. Exactly where do you think some particular decision came from? It's some combination of all these things. So neuroscientists hope that there's a grandmother neuron. Sometimes there's a grandmother neuron, there's a Tom Hanks neuron, but most of the time we don't know which part of our brain is actually responsible, other than this very macro characteristics.
You don't think we could put overhead on it to say, slow down, but trace where you got things that you brought back?
By the way, unfortunately, so that's actually a good question, but one thing that people say, I mean, I'll get to this one part about system 1, 2 in the next slide. Let me just show that. That will answer your question. So basically, let me complete this and say, essentially, getting ideas is a great thing, and LLMs can give you ideas, and you are some mechanical system which knows truth from falsity, can use these ideas and verify. That would be the way to go, rather than just assume that they're correct because LLM says. This is the answer to Shatima's question. Here's something that you actually should know, which some of you already kind of probably know. If you read something like Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman, which is, by the way, a great book. He got Nobel Prize, Kahneman and Tversky. Tversky didn't get it because Tversky died, and they don't give Nobel Prizes after you die. And so basically the understanding, it's not a proof, but understanding about human intelligence is that we have these essentially two metaphorical systems in our brain, system 2 and system 1. System 1 is good for reflexive reasoning. And system 2 is basically where civilization comes from. That's good for deliberative reasoning. And if you do deliberation, you got the answer, you can then put it in the system 2 so that next time if the same exact problem comes, you can repeat the answer without having to compute the whole thing again. We have both system 2 and system 1. Ultimately, current LLMs are just a giant system 1 for the humanity. Not in your head. It's a giant non-veridical. Veridical is the name you use for databases. That means you exactly get out what you put in. Non-veridical basically means memories are reconstructed. And you guys know this more than anybody else. That's why you know that witnesses are not to be trusted, because we reconstruct memories. So that's one thing that we have common with LLMs. They reconstruct memories, we reconstruct memories. Okay, but we do have a system 2, so we can actually check under certain cases whether the reconstruction we did is actually true. Okay, plus, if I did deliberately lie, you will say, whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God, so you'll be in the jail, if you can be shown to be lying. Exactly how are you going to put ChatGPT in jail? You have to figure that out. What does that mean to put these systems, penalizing? So in general, LLMs are system 1, and you cannot get system 2 behavior by slowing down system 1. You need system 2 separately. In fact, there are people who are doing research saying, take your time. 2 LLMs, take your time. Pause tokens, put more pauses so that you won't right away answer the question. That's basically putting lipstick on a pig, right? Because it's not going to change. It's not changing what it does. It basically just does, completion in the context of the context, including this pause part. And it's not going to do reasoning. And that's actually my research, that in fact, they can't do reasoning, they can't do verification. And we have papers to do that. So that actually gets me to the broad consequence of law, which I think I'm going to just repeat because mostly I mentioned that liability issues for automated decisions are going to be important. And the question then becomes, are those decisions made by deep and narrow systems? Are they made by explicit knowledge systems? Are they made by generative systems? Generative systems, they were not supposed to be right to begin with. You be happy if they're right. You're not going to be unhappy, they're not, because they made up stuff. Because that's what they're good for, they're making up stuff. And making up stuff can be put in a good way by saying you're very creative. Okay, so it's very important to understand modern machine learning systems, essentially, they are not programs written by human, but are essentially learned from data. And so as I showed you this, it becomes hard to pin down where the blame should go. And then, skip over this. And then bias decisions is something that was brought up, and I kind of answered it earlier. The problem, especially in biases, is it's a property of the data. And the question is, so you have these examples like, if you ask DALL-E 3, a person at social services was a productive person. This is only the prompt. And that's how those pictures look. Now, the interesting thing is when I said these same words, you had pictures. But thankfully, I can't tell what the heck is going on in your brains. Unless, Elon Musk does neural link and there's like a thing on your head saying what you are thinking. Until then, we don't know. So we do make mistakes. We do kind of, biases. The difference is not that we overcome biases by making system 2 stop our system 1 guesses. My joke is, my serious thing is that when we evolved to run away from tigers, when we saw the tiger, did we stop to think about the feelings of the tiger? What if the tiger is a good tiger? It wanted to say hello to you. And if the tiger has feelings, you actually hurt it. If you run away from me, I would be hurt. You might be doing it because of your evolutionary pressures, because people in courts tend to kind of harass you, and so you run. Okay, but that's the thing. So we actually avoid our biases by letting system 2 override our system 1 guesses. Not because we only think pure thoughts. There is no such thing. Okay. But then if you try to make LLMs do, or the generative systems do, quote unquote, better answers, this is what happens. This is basically where you had Gemini basically saying, generate image of 1943 German soldier, and it essentially made, colored people and Asian people, etc. They're all part of German. So essentially Nazis apparently included African American, like blacks and Chinese. Why? Because it was just saying, let's make it more diverse. Because somebody just said, make all the answers more diverse. This is sort of doesn't work because it's a much deeper problem. And I don't want that kind of social engineering to be left to companies. We should weigh those questions. I mean, it makes sense that we have to weigh those questions. They're hard questions. Fraud and evidence redaction is going to be a huge, huge issue. We already talked a lot about it. And this is a picture. What a lovely picture. You all love it, right? Except when you count the number of toes. There are 4 toes, right? Until then, you never see that. You look at the little boy and the monkey and the banana. Banana also is like funny looking banana now that you think about it. Okay, but these are the ways you can tell that these are deep fakes instead of just letting your first impulses be impressed. By the way, this is not surprising. So I remember going to a classical Indian dance, sitting next to my friend who was a classical Indian dancer. And I saying, oh, that woman is such a beautiful dancer, what a great dancer. And the woman looked at me and said, you bozo, she's not the best dancer. She's the best looking person. This other person is the best dancer. We fall for external form. And the way we advance is to realize that and try to, grow over that. Okay. So as I said, that is the thing that you can buy if you want to get an extra appendage so that nobody can question you. Evidence witnessable issues are going to be issue. In general, I think deepfakes are going to be such an issue that your deepfakes might be better than yourself. So your mother may want to talk to your deepfake than you. Okay, and this is like the Charlie Chaplin lookalike contest where Charlie Chaplin regularly used to come now second because somebody else looks better according to people's perception of what Charlie Chaplin is. There's this stuff like UACT, etc. The regulations are coming, but coming to the summary. I mean, I think that there are some regulations are coming, but they're quite questionable still. We are still in that's why I'm so happy that you're thinking about it. Lots of thought is needed. One of the big things is actually ahead of this in that I mean, you can put it in either which way that there's too much regulation or at least they think about regulation, right? So one of the things is they basically have this GDPR that many of you heard about, and that essentially if the machine makes a decision that affects you, you should be able to ask for an explanation. The problem, however, is that one deep and narrow system can make a decision. And the decision actually, if you were to do mechanistic interpretability, it depends on your skin color. And then the broad and shallow system gives the explanation because it knows the kind of explanations that are good. And what are you going to do about it? This is going to be an issue that you have to deal with, right? So finally, impressive advances, but very brittle failure modes. And as I said, think of the difference between explicit knowledge versus tacit knowledge. Think of the difference between deep and narrow versus broad and shallow. Think of the difference between discriminative, which is labeling, versus generative, which is generating instances. And those are all essentially what AI is. Currently, I mean, I made my Lennon thing. Imagine there's no AI, it's not hard to do, no trolleys to kill a diaper. We have too many trolley killers, which are basically Wemos running around, especially near the university, and no deepfakes too. Imagine all the GPUs refreshing just the CRTCPs. There's no data set bias. I wonder if you can, no need to explanation of the GDPR and the Nations of Man, but just like Lennon's imagination, that imagination also is nice to imagine. There are many, many good things that AI is doing, and we have to deal with all technology is dual use, right? And intelligence is the ultimate technology. So if you can do versions of intelligence, you can misuse it as well as use it. And that's why I'm happy you're thinking about it. Thank you for your time. And if there are any more questions, I will take it. Otherwise, thank you.
When you went through all the different things and the magic in technology, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
It seems to me, as you were pointing out, so many of the different things we use every day are AI.
Mhm.
Spell check.
Yeah.
Autocorrect.
Yeah.
Grammar check, all of those things. Is there, and one thing I think we'll probably talk about a little, is there anything like an admonition, and some courts have gone to this idea of, did you use AI in any way and tell us what you used? It seems to me that I couldn't write anything that I would not say, unless I've gone to pen and paper. I can't even use my
Yeah,
little pad here.
So I would ask a more nuanced question, hopefully
Yeah.
after this talk, because first of all, I want you to understand that spell check, autocorrection, grammar check, they're all generative AI. They're essentially all cheaper versions of ChatGPT. We were able to do this before. Before, they were just used to kind of change the spelling. Then they started adding an extra word or two. I mean, if you try to send a Gmail, if you try to give, if somebody send you a mail, it will tell you what to say back in the, 1 or 2 sentences. Now it can write paragraphs. So that's all generative AI. It's just scary. Okay. But then you can also talk about, did you make a decision, based on not just writing? I mean, first of all, if you write and the accuracy of what you've written is important, then I think, in the courts of law, obviously, if you send something, if you give something to them, then to somebody, and you ask these systems which actually made up content, and you didn't realize it, then you have to be held responsible, in my view, right? Checking spelling is different from checking veracity, because all of them are connected, but basically we do differentiate between style and content. And so the problem with all these lawyers is not that anybody is complaining that by the way, as a professor, I get lots and lots of emails from international students saying, we want to work with you, we want to do this, etc. In the past, as soon as I open the mail, I can tell where it is coming from. Is it Indian English? Is it Chinese English? Is it Japanese English? Now they are all ChatGPT English. Right?
Begs the question of whether we care.
No, that's a good point. So it is, in fact, we may not care. So in fact, the point is the judges don't mind that the lawyers are making briefs which are in sort of more standard, maybe, kind of homogeneous English. They mind that they made up cases. They mind that they made up facts. But the problem is the underlying technology doesn't differentiate between facts and style. So in fact, this is the one very big thing. I mean, much of my research is about that. As I said, to repeat myself, we always considered style to be harder than content. In fact, people would say, like, essentially anybody can have content, but the style, it's only some people have the right style, etc. It changes the way we look at the world, because style is easy now. And what used to be easier, previously, now is the only hard stuff left, that's the content. And you have to ask yourself, how does that change your thinking? In fact, I honestly say, with Justice Mill's question, that honestly, if you want me to pay attention to your mail, write it in bad English. I might actually pay attention, right? Because it's different. That's how you get people's attention. Do you understand what I'm saying? And by the way, the other thing is, there are certain weird patterns that ChatGPT generates, and that might also be changing. So in fact, on PBS, when ChatGPT came out, they had this high school philosophy, the college philosophy teacher who basically came say, oh my God, I'm gone. And the philosophy essays can never be told whether they wrote it or not, etc. It's all looking very nice, etc. And then 3 months later, they again had him on the program. He said, I can spot a ChatGPT essay from 10 miles away. How? Well, it's not, we are adaptive. We have basically the ability to tell slowly that there are patterns that will slowly only articulate. One of the interesting things about tacit knowledge is we are such linguistic animals that even the tacit knowledge will wind up putting words for it, right? And so even the sports are all tacit knowledge stuff, and yet we have names, we have words to describe. Food is tacit knowledge stuff. We have words to describe food. Taste words to describe taste, and so on. And so it's basically the thing is that you would be careful. I mean, so one of the other things is the one pattern that actually somebody pointed out is that I don't know if any of you noticed it, but if you ask ChatGPT, by the way, my students, when they write their papers, I look at the papers, I can spot, just like that philosophy guy, because I have an idea of how this student can write, and suddenly it looks a very different kind of English. And then sure enough, yeah, we use ChatGPT. And another dead giveaway, apparently currently, is Delve, DELVE. If anybody delves into anything, they use ChatGPT. So I'm actually adding an extra rule for my spam filter. All mails that delve, go delve in spam filter, spam folder. Again, these are things, I mean, once I know this, they're going to change the conditional probability, and it's a basically, as you find the bad guys will change, and so on and so forth. And so that's a arms race. And all interesting stuff in the world is arms race. I mean, evolution. The fact that we are here is because of arms race. So yeah.
Dr. Rao, we really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, a brief question.
Oh, just real quick, yes, thank you. Do you foresee the future of LLMs moving more towards specific industries, like the courts? I think there's.
So one of the things that people do is they do this thing called fine tuning. That means there are two ways you can make it more specific to a particular industry, which is you will still have the ChatGPT, but then you will either fine tune it with case data, or you use case library in a outside database that would be called RAG, retrieval augmented generation, and then it only summarizes the case. Of those two, the first one changes the internal weights. The second one is actually using database technology. And the thing that you can trust right now is the database technology. Because you take the file and summarize it. It can actually hallucinate even during that. In fact, one of the things I was having conversation with a student yesterday evening, she played with this thing where she essentially used some idioms where they will have a particular ending to the idiomatic sentence, and she made it all be some magic word. So that's against the idiomatic usage. And then she kind of given it as a prompt and asked it to complete some other idiom with, hoping that it'll complete the magic word. It actually goes back to its pre-training. This is the problem. So if you read an essay which runs counter to your prior knowledge, you're more likely than not to summarize it with your prior knowledge rather than what the essay says. And that would be hallucinating. But that's better than fine tuning because that's basically for costly and B doesn't give much of it.
Thank you.